Hello and welcome to Homicide Hobbies. I'm Andy,
And I'm Claire.
and we're here to talk about some of the disturbing things that go on in the world, past and present. We feel like not knowing doesn't mean the crazy doesn't exist.
So we're going to scar you with the knowing.
Enjoy.
Today's case takes place in Alabama. It was in the year 2002, and it's a father and son case. Tried very hard to locate if there's a mother in the picture, but it doesn't seem like she was in the household when this all took place. I don't know if she had passed early on, but she's never mentioned in any of this, not in any court things either. So father and son, no other siblings, those two live in a house. And I feel like the mother had died earlier, or again was out of the picture early on, because there's a lot of information on both father and son were very close, almost like best buds, that very much the dad's name's Forrest Butch Bowyer. He goes by Butch, so from here on it's Butch and his son Brett, who was 12 at the time, and his dad's 54. But Butch will discuss and all throughout the case that his son was the light of his life. They talked all the time, just buddy old pals, and Brett was a very good boy. So his dad, Butch, is a used car salesman, and since the town in which this all happened is fairly small, and this is kind of around when the internet's first coming about, really, for Alabama. So the town gossip kind of thing is more of a thing.
I mean, not to just throw an ADD moment out there, but your internet still isn't that great.
Very much so, but during this time, even fewer people have computers and kind of things. So talking about people and just gossiping, that's more of a thing during this time. So Butch is a used car salesman and has a reputation for carrying large amounts of cash on him, because in the rural area that it is, it's probably easier for him to go from his car dealership home and keep it at his house and then to the bank on a different day, rather than being next door to a bank kind of scenario. But word around town is he's got a reputation for having large amounts of cash either on him, in his car, or in his home. So that's what leads him to be targeted for these two individuals. On February 17th, 2002, Michael David Caruth, 43, and Jimmy Lee Brooks Jr., 22, go knocking on Butch's door. It's about 10 p.m. on a Sunday night. Brett was still up because him and his dad were talking while Butch was doing final paperwork for like his titles and everything that were sold on the previous day, so that way he could file them on Monday or do whatever it is paperwork wise that car dealer people do. That's what he was doing while his son was about to get ready, take a shower, and go to bed. So he thought it was weird when there's a knock at the door, because again, it's 10 o'clock on a Sunday, and in the South, nobody does anything on a Sunday, let alone 10 o'clock on a Sunday. So he gets up and goes over to the door, and he's met by Michael David Caruth and Jimmy Lee Brooks Jr. And they are dressed as police officers and claiming that they're part of the narcotics division and that they have a warrant for Butch's arrest for having some sort of drug. To which Butch is confused, because obviously he doesn't do drugs, he doesn't have drugs. This seems like a mistake, but being a good citizen kind of scenario, he's going to respect his police officers and just figures he'll go with them quietly and he'll get it all sorted out, because it's clearly a mistake, so he has nothing to worry about.
Right.
But he is concerned because it's 10 o'clock on a Sunday and his 12-year-old son would be by himself in the house. So he tells them that, and during that time, Brett kind of peeks around the door just to see, who's at the door. So
like
now
normal as a kid.
Yeah, absolutely. Somebody knocks, you got to go see who it is. Since Brett sees them, they decide that they're going to take him with them. So they handcuff Butch and then load him and Brett in the back of the car. And now it's a white Crown Victoria that they're loaded into. So obviously 2002, that's very much a typical unmarked police car kind of thing to expect. So no red flags there. It's not like being tossed in a Civic kind of thing. But
Right.
when he's loaded in the back of that car, it has that plexiglass, like to keep whoever's in the back seat from messing with the people in the front.
Right.
Which is a little weird that they have that anyway.
Why?
Because let me give you a little background. Michael David Caruth, which we'll just call him Michael, he works as a bondsman for his wife's bond company, which is Tri-County Bonding. But I would assume that's why he has that vehicle in the event that they take anybody into custody kind of thing. But you think that's not something somebody just has as a vehicle. Now, Jimmy Lee Brooks, I don't believe he was employed during this time. He's 22. We'll just call him Jimmy for the sake of not having to run these people's long names every time I mention them. But
All right.
Jimmy is a family friend of Michael, but he also has a history of being in and out of jail. And I don't know how often that has to be when you're 22. So you figure anything prior to 18, they don't really mention. But he has
Yeah,
a
that's pretty crazy.
history in that short time of being in and out of jail, and they don't reference him being employed at this time. So again, I would say he wasn't. Now, Michael, he was born and raised in Alabama, and he was a self-proclaimed lone wolf, and he didn't have a family. He didn't have a desire to have one other than working for his wife, but he believed to be that children would interfere with what he wanted to do in his life, so he just did his thing. Not 100% sure why he was even married, but he was.
Wait, I thought Jimmy was a family friend of Michael.
Yeah, a family friend, but Michael, his take on having kids and that whole family aspect, he thought kids get in the way, so kids were never a goal for him. He had a more of a desire for money and stuff like that, but he didn't believe in close relationships.
But
Even weirder,
if his wife is a bail bondsman and they have no kids, you said he's in his 40s?
Yep, 43.
43, and he's hanging out with a kid that's in his 20s. So that doesn't, I don't even understand. You wouldn't think that you wouldn't think that a criminal that his wife is obvious, maybe she was his bail bondsman at one point or another, but you wouldn't suspect that they would be friends. That seems like
I feel like that's probably how they crossed paths, of they've bonded him out kind of thing, and maybe by being close pals or that they were a family friend kind of scenario is why they were okay with bailing him out, because they knew, I mean, he was good for his bond. I don't know. But weirdly, Michael always had a history of being behind or past due on all of his payments for anything he'd have. So he was always kind of trying to find easy ways to get cash, and living a life like that, he would increasingly become more desperate. So that's what kind of leads up to these two meet up. And then obviously, if Jimmy is just in the life of crime and a 22-year-old who it's not too hard to sell an easy way to get cash kind of a strategy. So he's immediately on board with that. And I wouldn't think Michael's wife knows anything about their decision to try to rob somebody. But that's what leads up to, they knock on a used car dealer's door, who it seems like this is going to be an easy thing to do to get a whole bunch of cash. Now, the reason they decide to load Butch in the back of the car is they think that by taking him away from the house would be easier to rob him. That way, if he's got any weapons or anything, would be my guess, that they haven't been in his house, so it'd be easier for them to be taken by surprise if he stumbles on anything. So that's why they want to lure him away from the house, to get him out of his comfort zone, and then.
But wouldn't you think his money is in the house?
So we'll get to that. So he's got his wallet on him when they load him in there. So they get in the car and then start driving out of town. They park. They don't really say how far the drive was, but far enough that they drive into the sticks where there's like a little construction zone, but we're not talking they're in the car for hours kind of scenario. They're still within driving distance from the house. So Michael demands that Butch empty his wallet and his pockets, and he's not satisfied with what he has on him. So they tell him that they're gonna rob him, that they want all of his money. So they just like, let's drive back to the house and we're gonna empty your safe. So at this point, they're expecting to have like hundreds of thousands of dollars in that safe, because that's what's rumored for him to have on hand is about $100,000. So they drive back to the house, unload them, walk him into the house. They crack open the safe. It only had $40,000 in it, which to me, I'm still like, that's a lot of money to just, they could stop right there, grab it, and beat feet. But yeah, they also, right? So like only $40,000.
That's still a lot of money.
Yes. So they also find a .38 caliber Smith & Wesson revolver that they pocket in there with that. But Michael's not satisfied with that. He demands that Butch show him where the rest of the cash is. So Butch leads him to a lockbox that's hidden in his closet that has another $20,000 in it. Now, I don't know if really this is the best way to go for poor Butch anyhow, because now that he's gone to a second spot, now naturally Michael thinks that he must be hiding even more. So they like just tear up the house kind of thing. But they don't find anything else. So now they're at a $60,000 haul.
I mean, that's a lot of money. Yeah, first of all, that's a crazy amount of money to have stashed in your house. God forbid you have a house fire. But to just steal that amount of money?
I would hope that the safe was fireproof and as the lockbox too, but I don't know. So Michael's livid. He forces them back into the vehicle, and then they start driving out of town. Now, Butch is nervous because he doesn't know why they need to go back into the car. He's trying to keep it together because his son is naturally scared that what do you do with that? But they pass the... Huh?
Does it say whether or not they tied up his son or handcuffed him or anything?
They do not say the son was tied up at all.
Okay.
But so they're driving out of town. Butch gets nervous as they start going further into the sticks. They pass a police department, and then they end up coming to a stop at a construction area. Naturally, this is probably closer to the midnight realm. They pull him out of the car by knife point, and Jimmy forces the two to their knees. Michael slits Butch's throat ear to ear, and as Butch is losing blood, Michael says to him, "Sharp, isn't it?" Which I think is fucking disgusting.
That's awful.
So then he hands the knife to Jimmy, who cuts him from the other side. So you figure left to right and then right to left by somebody else. And then they shove him backwards into a grave they had dug earlier in the evening. Now, the grave is not a deep one. It's like roughly 18 inches, but it makes you think that this was a very disgusting plan, that they dug that grave before they even went to their house.
Yeah, they knew they were going to kill him.
Yeah, that it's just like disgusting human beings. So meanwhile, the son's watching all of this because they're both, I mean, he's standing next to his dad when that happens. Like they knelt down in front of a grave for him to see that his dad has his throat slit, then backwards into the grave, and Butch is just laying there bleeding. Michael tells Jimmy that, okay, I've done one, now it's your turn. So Butch is laying in the grave pretending to be dead, hoping that, he can take him by surprise or something, because now that they think he's dead. So he's doing all that, and then he hears a gunfire. He didn't realize they took the gun out of the safe. So he hears a shot fire, which startles him, but he doesn't move because obviously, you're not expecting any of this. So Jimmy shoots Brett in the head. Brett apparently is making gargling noises, and the two are laughing to each other. And then Jimmy goes, "This little motherfucker just doesn't want to die," and then fires 2 more times.
Oh my God.
So they toss his body onto his dad's, and they assume they're both dead, which at this point Brett is dead. And then they use shovels that they got out of the trunk to cover their bodies and are packing the dirt, laughing and making jokes this whole time, because obviously Butch, he's alive, so he hears this one. And these two dipshits think that this is going to be a fantastic plan because it's where they're going to be constructing a road. So they're covering this spot up with hopes that when the construction workers come back and then start doing the road and everything, he's going to be paved over and they'll never find them. So they think they're geniuses and speed off. Butch, now buried alive. And
I'm still stuck on
dead.
the fact that they just shot that kid 3 times.
Yeah. Now it's a good thing that these two brainiacs didn't check to see that Butch was dead, because they did not cut deep enough to sever an artery. They cut deep enough to cause a lot of blood loss. But Butch realizes he's still alive, and starts trying to wiggle and make room so he can dig out. Now, because he didn't have any severed arteries, he's bleeding, but it's not bleeding out fast enough for him to keel over. So it's fortunate that they cut his throat twice and they missed. So 50-year-old Butch digs his way out, which takes about 10 to 15 minutes. I don't know how they gauge that time, because obviously when shit hits the fan, time feels like it goes by so incredibly slowly. So I don't know if it actually took 10 to 15 minutes or it just felt like it took forever.
Yeah.
But
with
he digs
his dead
himself.
child on top of his body. Like,
Yes.
Oh my God.
So he digs his way out and then pulls his son out. He finds his feet and pulls him out, props him up so that at least he knows he's got to leave him, but he wants to be able to come back, obviously. So he starts walking. It's about a quarter-mile walk. He makes it to the highway and just frantically is waving for help. He flags down a car. The driver gives Butch his cell phone to call the Lee County Police Department. Now, this part I thought was weird because you give them the phone to call 911.
Yeah,
I'd be like,
crazy.
I got this. I'll call for you. Like, yeah, you hold on to your neck, guy. Like, that seems like the priority here.
Like, here's my shirt. Please put some pressure on that. I'll make the call. You just don't relax too much. Keep your head on. I got this.
Like this, it's crazy. Now, keep in mind, this is in the backwoods of Alabama, and fortunately for Butch, there happens to be a deputy that's only 2 miles out. So the deputy gets there, and a lot of this is caught on the dash cam. So I'll post this when we put it on Facebook and everything. So if you want to watch the dash cam footage, you see his bloody t-shirt and him holding his neck. So it's crazy that this man had his neck slit twice, dug out of a grave, and then walked a quarter mile, and he's still moving around. Like, I just think it's crazy what people can go through, and they're still trucking.
Yeah, thank God for adrenaline.
Yeah. So, I mean, even listening to this officer dispatch for they need an ambulance, and that this guy said he was just buried alive. His son's been shot 3 times. The officer on that call even does this is crazy. This is a bad one. We need people out here. But you don't expect to pull up and see somebody who's got their head on. I mean, he wasn't decapitated, obviously, because he's walking around, but still, his shirt's covered in blood.
But when the ambulance to take in.
Yeah. So he's talking to the officers. He's trying to give them as much of a description of both these dipshits so that because he doesn't know at this point if he's going to live or die. He knows his son is dead, but just hearing him talk to the officers as clearly as he can, because he knows this information needs to get out now, because these people who knows where they're driving to. So he gives them a description of the vehicle that they were in. So it kind of is fortunate or unfortunate for them, however you want to slice it, that he's a used car dealer because he knows exactly what the car was. So he gives them the description. He gives them the description of the people. And then he tells them that I can't get into this ambulance. I want to take you to where my son is. I can't leave him here. And naturally, the police weren't going to just up and leave anyway. But he wants to walk them back to where his son is. And they do.
Crying. Like, this is not okay, Claire.
Hey, I thought it was just the craziest thing. But at the same time, that's why I wanted to let you know that I don't know what happened with Brett's mom or Butch, because that scenario is never mentioned. But those two, all they had was each other. So I very much felt the whole, he already knew. I mean, he feels like he let his son down anyway, but he knows that he's not gonna go down without a fight, in the sense of he knows his son's murderers are out there, and this is a vital information in time. So he walks them back there. So now a half a mile this man walks, back and forth, but with his neck slit. I don't understand all this stuff. Well, he went through the woods, so I don't know if in the dark and disoriented, I don't know the path that he took, and I just think it's crazy. He knew how to get back, but just still nothing addressed to his neck, by the way. So I was just like, I don't understand all this. But like,
you would think that bare minimum they would have at least had EMTs try to
well, this is why before the ambulance gets there, like when they call for the ambulance, he's like, well, we're waiting for that. I want to take you to see my son. That way you know where he's at. I can't leave him without you guys knowing where he's at. But I just think it had to be a horrible scenario. You figure why his throat was slit, he dug him back up and propped him up. And in that moment, when he realizes his son's dead, has got to be like, I don't understand how he was able to muster the energy to walk a quarter mile to the highway just with all the things going through his head other than being in shock. I don't know how this man pulled it together to do everything he did.
That's amazing.
But because he was able to do that, I mean, you figure if he just lied in that grave, he would have been dead too.
Yeah, he would have suffocated or bled out or whatever.
And then there's a good chance that they would have never known who did it, because this is one of those things of random crime. They would have not known. They wouldn't have known unless, I mean, they don't mention like if they fingerprinted the house or anything like that. But fortunately, because Butch was able to give such vivid details of them and the vehicle, they're arrested the next day. Now, originally, Michael is arrested first because it was his car, and they actually arrested him while he was still in the driver's seat. But Jimmy wasn't with him, but it doesn't take him long at all to roll on Jimmy, and then he's arrested as well.
I'm sure his wife was very embarrassed.
So all of the news articles, at no point does she ever make a statement. So I feel like it was one of those, what the fuck?
I mean, that's her job, is to bail criminals out of jail. And now here her husband is getting arrested for murder and attempted murder and robbery, armed robbery.
Yeah. Well, and so they do eventually get charged with capital murder and then attempted murder. But meanwhile, since that obviously doesn't happen the next day, that Butch goes into surgery. He does make a full recovery, so he's good on that front. Jimmy and Michael do go to court. They are found guilty of capital murder, and they are both sentenced to the death penalty. Now, mind you, this is 20 years earlier. They are still on death row in Alabama because they're still running out their appeals. Now, I did look it up. It's usually an average of 16 years people sit on death row. So I would imagine any day now they're going to run out the last of their appeals. So we'll have an update of whenever that happens. But as of this date, both of those little shits are alive. They are not housed in the same jail, prison, whatever you want to call it.
Is he still married? Is Michael still married to his wife, or did she divorce his ass?
I would hope she divorced his ass, but I do not know. Again, I don't know why some of this is so hard to locate, because I don't know if it's because it's still, they're going through appeals, but some of it was like just redacted kind of thing. Now, because of this type of crime or the way it was, they were a little suspicious because a month before they knocked on Butch's door, there was a similar breaking and entering kind of situation in a home in the next county over, and it was Thurman Ratliff and Catherine Ratliff. Now, Thurman was 68 and his wife was 62, and on January 30th, Michael and Jimmy kicked in their door. Now, this one was weird because they had a third guy with them, James Edward Gary. So these three little assholes kick in their door and rob the place and shoot Thurman and Catherine. And
wait,
that was
they killed two other people
a month earlier.
So why were they not in jail? They couldn't connect it to them?
No. So since it was another case of these three did not know Thurman or Catherine when they kicked in the door, shot them, and robbed the house, that was still an open investigation because they had nothing to go on. So that's why when then they decided to do it a second time, because I would imagine they didn't find money. I couldn't find what Thurman did or what Catherine did. So I would imagine they didn't get a big enough haul. I don't know if because James Edward Gary, he was 27 at the time when they did that. And he was found guilty of capital murder because, again, Michael, he rolled on everybody kind of thing. So when they asked if they did that after Michael was in custody, they were just going to ask him about Thurman and Catherine. He admitted to being part of that one too. Now, those are secondary charges for Michael and Jimmy on the Butch and Brett case. And there's not a lot of information other than it was a robbery and murder.
I mean,
but they were shot to death during that robbery in Beauregard, Alabama. James Edward Gary weirdly got life without parole. So I don't know if that's a scenario of maybe he didn't go in the house, maybe he was the wheelman. I don't know, maybe because he didn't pull the trigger, but he's serving life without parole.
That's weird.
But again, that case was unsolved when Michael and Jimmy decide that they're going to go and see how long they can run out their life of crime, apparently very briefly. And that's one reason why I think they were so messy with Butch, because they thought they got away with it already.
Yeah, they were careless. They got cocky.
So, yeah, it's like 17 days later is when they decide to knock on Butch's door, which is why I assume they weren't able to get enough money, if whatever they were looking for when they shot and killed the Ratliffs. Otherwise, that probably would have gone as a cold case because, again, there was no connection. They wouldn't have connected those dots. There were no witnesses. So other than the fact that if they would have checked to see if Butch was actually dead, or if they even would have shot Butch to, double tap kind of thing, while he was laying in the grave, they probably wouldn't have solved this one either, and there would have been even more victims. But again, that they were just morons and thought they were in the clear yet again, and they just made out with $60,000 and free and clear, but only because Butch had such a veracity for life and no quitting the man. His description and everything is what led to their capture, and that's why the Ratliffs also were able to get some justice in that. But
not
again,
that
I wish I could say they died, but they're still on death row.
So I wonder if that's why when you, like with some of these other cases that we see where there's such a case of overkill where you hear about like they strangled him, they shot him, they stabbed him, like and they talk about how it was like extreme overkill. I wonder if it's cases like these where their victims survived, where they're like, yeah, we can't have that happen. You know what I mean?
Yeah. I thought it was weird, even like the whole throat slitting thing, and then you pass the knife to someone else to also slit his throat. I thought that was a weird thing to do.
So I thought
Um,
I thought he was giving him the knife to slit the son's throat.
yeah, so I feel like since Brett um, was the next one up and Butch is laying in the grave, I feel like that's why Butch played dead, is because he assumed that they'd do the same thing to Brett, and then him playing dead would mean he could help his son once they chunked him in. I don't know if things would have been different if he knew that they had a gun. I don't know why they decided to slit his throat and shoot the boy. It just, I can only imagine him laying there and then hearing his son gurgling, and then these two dipshits laughing about how he doesn't want to die, and then shoot him 2 more times. Like it's so disgusting.
Yeah.
I mean, and obviously, again, this is a small town. They'll interview like the teacher, not the classmates, because obviously this is a group of 12-year-olds. But the whole school is just riddled with the fact that this was a random crime. It could happen to anybody. It's just scary. They're glad that obviously they're caught, but they do plant like 12 pear trees for him. They name like a portion of the school that he went to. It was Glenwood, and it's in, I believe, Lee County. But they name a section of the building after him, and it's still there. So it's just as like just a memorial for him, because he was a good kid. That it, in all rights, it shouldn't have happened at all to anybody, but it just, they wanted a memorial for Brett, because they would say that the light in his face will shine forever on ours. His spirit will always live with us, is what his plaque says. But
I don't like the child cases. I've told you that.
Well, so this one is actually for Lee and Russell County, is where this kind of, it's on county lines, so it trickles around, but it's one of the most heinous cases for that area.
And we don't know when they're scheduled to be put to death?
No, because as of this morning, they still have not run out their appeals. And that's what they're still listed as on the death row list.
Yeah.
No date pending.
I don't think I have any useful comments on this one. My stomach is churning. I'm picturing my 12-year-old. Like, I couldn't imagine being that father.
Yeah.
Well, I mean, kudos to him for having the sheer will to survive that. But I couldn't imagine having my throat slit twice, hearing my son dying. And he was probably sobbing when he saw his dad being attempted to be murdered. Like, yeah, I couldn't imagine.
Yeah. So you can watch their confession. I can post the link to that one of when they're interviewing Michael. But it's really sick because he's the one who says that, they heard him making gurgling noises, and that's why they shot 2 more times. But it's just like, it's disgusting to hear somebody say that I'm hoping Brett was dead and it was just air coming up, rather than he could have potentially lived too. Why did they shoot him a total of 3 times and slit Brett's throat, or Butch's throat? Just disgusting. Because again, that when they went back to the house, cracked open the safe, they could have left with $40,000. Call it a day.
I will never understand. I would like to understand their minds, but I will never truly comprehend it because I just don't have it in me. I would never be able to hurt a child. Yeah. Like, how do you hurt a child?
I have no earthly idea. Now, that's where part of me wonders what was going on with Michael and his wife, because when they talked to him with police, Michael and Jimmy had plans to do like a life of crime kind of thing. They wanted to see how long they could go with just killing people and robbing them.
Well, so they knew they were eventually going to get caught.
Yeah.
And they were just going to live their best criminal life until they did, which is just.
Exactly. So that's where it was just like,
you can't put on a mask. You can't put on a mask and just rob people. You have to go and murder innocent people. Like, I don't understand.
Well, and this is all speculation, but in my mind, I would think him and his wife weren't doing so great if he was planning to just go on a murdering spree and robbing spree. Because you would think you'd let your spouse in on that if, like, hey, I got a genius idea.
She's on the other side of the law, though. Like,
But he was her bounty hunter. So it's like, right. So he must have known this wasn't the best plan. But at the same time, were they on the outs? Is that why, like, I mean...
Or maybe he thought that she was, like, a good cover. Nobody would suspect him because of what his wife does.
Maybe. But it's just amazing that they didn't do masks, because I don't know if they would have done anything different. There's a pretty good shot that they would not have been able to catch him. Now, mind you, that detective that showed up on the scene, he is now our sheriff.
Really?
Yep. So kudos to
Good on
him.
him.
Now,
Yeah.
he has given interviews since this case, and he'll still say anytime he drives that road or passes those woods, he can't help but think of Brett, and obviously of Butch. Butch is still alive. I don't know whereabouts he lives. He's still a resident of Alabama. But I imagine we'll be hearing from him whenever these two assholes finally get the death penalty. But
you know, I feel sorry. Like, obviously, the father and anybody that knew the 12-year-old, like, I feel sorry for them. But, like, the responding officers and, like, the paramedics and things like that, they have a tough job. Like, pulling up on a scene where a kid has been murdered. They're strong individuals.
Yeah.
I don't know if I could go to work the next day.
I don't know that they did.
I'm sure they needed some sort of, like, work related.
I would imagine, yeah, for anybody after a child incident, I would imagine they get a pass on that one, because you got to
some kind of follow-up to make sure they're,
yeah, you got to sort through that. It's not an easy thing to come across. But again, I'll post the link for the confession video, and then also if you want to watch the dash cam one. It's just crazy the amount of blood on that man's t-shirt and him just walking around. I don't know. Way to go, Butch. You got people off the street, because who knows how many other people would have fallen victim to them. I'm just glad he was able to survive. I hope that wherever he is, he's happy and is able to move on from all this tragedy. And then also just try to mull it over in the sense of random crimes happen. Keep your eyes open, because there are a lot of disgusting, vicious people out there.
Heck yeah. If I don't know you, I'm not talking to you. I'm approached by somebody and it's just totally random and out of the blue. And, like, sometimes in the most awkward situations.
Yeah. Well, and I think go with your gut on things, because if something doesn't feel right, it's probably not.
Yeah. Like, I don't shop at night. I shop in the morning. I rarely talk to people. I mean, I'm sure I seem like an uber bitch.
But you're alive.
But I'm alive. We got too many kids and a husband that requires babying.
Hear, hear.
But
that's all I got.
We hope you enjoyed today's episode of Homicide Hobbies. If we made you laugh, if we made you cry, or if we mind-fucked you for the day, then we thank you for listening. Please write a review on whatever you're listening to us on. Tell your friends, tell your family, tell your coworkers. We're freaking awesome. And join us next week for another episode of Homicide Hobbies. I'm Andy.
And I'm Claire.
That's all we've got.